So thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me about this important issue. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having us. Seriously.
Well, what got you first involved with the idea of sex trafficking and wanting to bring attention and awareness to this particular issue?
Well, we optioned a book now 13 years ago called Saving Zoe, which was the story about two sisters, and one of the sisters unfortunately passed away. And the grieving process and the younger sister, Echo, which Laura plays, ultimately finding out that there's more to her sister Zoe's death than meets the eye. And it took about 10 years to get the film made. It took about 2 years to get it distributed. And through making that project, we really ended up learning so much about sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, specifically online sexual exploitation. What's crazy about Saving Zoe is it was a book that was written in the era of MySpace. And the author, Alison Noel, who's fabulous, really didn't write the story with the thought of like, I'm going to make a statement about this. She was just writing a story because it was a common thing that was happening. And after we made the film, we ended up partnering with an organization called Equality Now, who really taught us so much about sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, because ultimately that is what happens to my character Zoe in the film. Equality Now introduced us to survivors who were instrumental in the final edit of the film, in educating us so that we could more eloquently speak about the subject and market it appropriately. And it was the year anniversary of the film's release not too long ago, and Laura and I really wanted to figure out a way to honor that in a way that was meaningful, in a way that is still addressing the issue. And so we decided to have a panel with two survivors, Melanie Thompson and Cristiano Eduardo, so that we can talk more about it. Again, our education on it really is instrumental because survivors spoke to us, and we wanted to give everyone who has seen the film, anyone who follows us on social media, the same opportunity that we had to learn a firsthand account from survivors, understand this issue better so that we can ultimately combat it.
Yeah, and to add something quickly to that point, I think just reiterating that the best defense we have at this moment is talking about it and having conversations. And unfortunately, we don't talk about this subject. We don't talk about sex trafficking. We don't talk about online sexual exploitation. Not even nearly enough, really, relatively not at all. I feel like it has entered the conversation and mainstream a little more with the revelations coming with everything with Jeffrey Epstein. But when we released Saving Zoe, it was the week last year that Epstein got arrested, and truly still we couldn't find press outlets that wanted to talk about it, that wanted to really have conversations about it, whether or not there's something more sinister or if it was just something that's an uncomfortable topic. I could truly see both. I think Vanessa and I feel it's our responsibility now, knowing more about this topic and still learning, to spread this awareness to anyone and everyone. And with social media, we're able to kind of make that happen.
Well, it was interesting you mentioned that when the book came out that the era of social media and then also gaming to a certain extent wasn't as prevalent as it is today, and wasn't the stalking ground that it is today. Can you talk to me a little bit about those kind of signs or things that, I'm a mother of 3 daughters, what should somebody be looking out for, to make sure that their kids are safe or, protected to a certain extent?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about social media is that it is our way of communicating now. It is in our zeitgeist. It isn't going away. And there's a lot of good that comes from it. There's a lot of bad that comes from it. But bottom line is it's here. It's how we communicate. And what traffickers and predators do is they learn, they evolve, they use ever-changing landscapes as tools at their disposal, because there's not much that we understand about it. So for example, there is a legal definition of human trafficking, sex trafficking, exploitation, but there is no legal definition of online sexual exploitation because there are so many different ways that it can happen, and we're all still just learning about it. Ultimately, one of the biggest things we find is something that happens in trafficking on the streets. It also happens online, which is the grooming process. And it can be a stranger who becomes a friend. It can be a stranger who starts threatening. It can be someone that you know and trust, who starts, again, either buttering you up more, isolating you to make you feel like they're the only person who cares about you, or threatens you as well. Laura and I have had this conversation a few times. You know, from a parent perspective, the worst thing you could do is take away the social media, take away the gaming, because then you're creating a distrust with your child. It's obviously hard depending on the age. It's a little bit easier to talk to teenagers. And I would encourage any parent who has a child who is preteen or teenage to have the difficult conversation, because kids are smart and we should be talking to them about this, because it is an issue that directly affects them. And even though it's a scary one, we live in a world that's scary and kids are seeing that online. And I think it's better to have that conversation. With younger children who use gaming, use social media, it's a little bit harder. One thing we've really been talking about is this idea of, if someone is talking to you and offering you something, whether you know them or not, that is something you need to tell me. If a person is telling you to not tell me something, don't tell your mom and dad this, don't tell them that we talked, don't tell them that I gave you that, that is something you need to tell me. And starting there with younger children, because ultimately that is how it happens. A lot of the times gifts are exchanged. A lot of the time compliments are exchanged. In a world of social media, you're putting yourself out there. A trafficker and a predator can see if you one day are saying, I'm feeling really down today, I'm feeling really isolated today, or man, I don't have Netflix, I wish that we could just buy Netflix. They're going to prey upon that.
Jeez. I get the whole, you know, don't tell your parents thing, that kids just love to have those kind of secrets and feel that they're grown up and having that kind of relationship that can be such a lure. Are there any indications once that process has already begun where that a parent or someone can spot, or is it really just having to be in tune and to watch for, I don't know, are there signs, or you just, again, the conversation?
Well, it's a bit of a multifaceted conversation. We ask this question and we go over this in our panel with our two survivors and advocates, Melanie Thompson and Christiana Eduardo. But, you know, especially with children and even teens and preteens, it's tough because I think there is a wide variety of stuff that can be happening between something as extreme as online sexual exploitation to, you know, having a fight with a friend or something, you know, that can be very real and big in their world, but isn't necessarily the same thing for intensity. And they can have a similar reaction, crying, sad, anxious, stressed, you know, all these different things. And so, you know, at the end of the day, like Vanessa was saying, the best thing you can do is just have conversations and have these talks, no matter how uncomfortable or hard they are, because without having a direct line of conversation about the topic, I think it's hard for kids and teens, and by the way, even adults, to understand what might be happening or what is happening.
And something that is also possibly a sign is this idea of a child having money, and you may not directly see that as a parent, but if all of a sudden your child was asking you for updates to a game or buying them Netflix or whatever, and they stop asking you all of a sudden, there's a possibility that someone else is purchasing that for them.
I see. When you talked about the idea of not having Netflix and wanting it, then these people are like, ding, 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 I'm going to reach out and like, I'll pay for that for you. And then you're,
exactly. And then they're not going to tell you because you already said no. And look, you know, there's an aspect of this that is, you know, parents, you know, children not having access to things because parents are like, well, you know, you're not ready to have that yet, or no, I'm limiting your time with that. There's another aspect of a disproportionately targeted world of poorer communities where parents truly work really hard and can't afford certain things. And again, a predator is going to prey upon that.
Yeah, I was looking at some research, and it is right that poorer families of color are disproportionately targeted by predators. But I'm curious,
LGBTQ.
Yeah, as well. But I'm curious for both of you, because you said this has been a 13-year process. So you were both rather young, and when you first connected with the book, and I believe your mother purchased the rights to the book. Is that right? So
yeah, produced the film with us.
Yes, and produce a film with you. So, that is a very kind of interesting choice to make, and to be committed to for so long. What was the original impetus, the drive, the reason why this spoke to you so much? Because it is pretty taboo of a subject, especially when you think it was 13 years ago when you guys were both younger. How did that all come about?
Well, I think, I'm not sure if you've read the book or seen the movie, but I think what's so interesting about it is that it's quite insidious. It's not your typical depiction of sex trafficking or exploitation, which is kind of taken, which is, that kind of extreme level of kidnapped. It's not like that at all. And so basically, long story short, my mom got me a bunch of young adult novels to read, truly with the idea of, she's like, we had been in the acting industry for years already, and we were kind of going through a bit of a rough patch, and my mom and dad were like, you guys don't have to do this anymore. You don't have to act. And Vanessa and I are like, no, we still want to, like, we're into it. And my mom's like, well, if that's the case, we're taking things into our own hands. So she gave me a bunch of young adult novels, because I'm obsessed with reading. And so I was 11 at the time, and I read all the different books, and I think I enjoyed all of them. But Saving Zoe really touched me. One, because the fact that I have a sister, and anyone who has a sibling and reads it, I think you have a really special relationship with that book, because it really dives into that bond and that connection. But two, it was dark, and it wasn't, not even the darkness that's associated with grieving and grief, but it was dark in this way about, at that time it was MySpace, and MySpace, I remember I was like wanting to get a MySpace, and I thought it was really interesting and timely. That's why, Vanessa was saying earlier, it's hilarious that it was about MySpace, and yet the story is more relevant than ever.
Yep.
Being 13 years ago. So I read it, and I'm like, this is really special. Like, this, to me, I think would connect, even at 11, with young adults, with my age group, with different people. And so I made my mom read it. My mom loved it. We made Vanessa read it. Vanessa loved it. And we contacted the author, and the author, again, as Vanessa was saying, it's not like she was an advocate for sex trafficking or online sexual exploitation. It was truly because young girls were sending, fans of her other novels were sending her and emailing her their pictures, their addresses, all these different things, saying, I want to be an actress, I want to be in your next movie, blah blah blah. And Allison was freaked with this idea, they don't know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is actually a vulnerable situation. So not even knowing much about the topic, she was astute enough to know that there is potential for a huge problem, and there is a huge problem as well. So we met with her, we were obsessed with her, she was amazing, and she really trusted us to get the job done. We had the rights for 10 years until we finally got a studio to invest some money and film it.
Talking about getting the job done, I know that it always feels like the laws of the United States, or in the world in general, are always lagging so far behind technology and where we are, particularly with social media and the web. Can you talk to me about, what can I as an individual, or where can people go to help promote, new kinds of laws or platforms to build awareness? What are the next steps? What do we need to be doing now?
Well, what's interesting is, so there's currently in the U.S. A bill that's on the Senate floor right now about researching more into human trafficking, getting survivors' perspectives on it. It was introduced by Karen Bass in the House of Representatives, and was passed in the House by flying colors, bipartisanship. I believe only one congressperson voted against the bill. And it's sitting on the Senate room floor. The Senate's not looking at it. They're not doing anything about it, which is very frustrating. That bill is a first step to learning more, especially because it involves getting survivor perspective and providing survivors with help once they get out of the situation. Another thing that Christiane and Melanie spoke about in our panel is this thing called the equality model, which is currently trying to be adapted in New York, which really decriminalizes the victim of the crime, which ultimately is the person being trafficked. There's a heavy debate on both sides of the spectrum in that regard, but across the board, that model will decriminalize, and that's something that they felt passionate about talking about. They're doing amazing work as advocates. Melanie has been involved with a variety of policies and laws, one being FOSTA SUSTA, which took about 10 years to change and get passed through. I think ultimately the first step is conversation. That's why we wanted to do this panel, because even going back to Saving Zoe, you know, we resonated so much with that book and it touched us so much. And our personal experience was through making it, discovering that it was about trafficking, discovering that it was about exploitation. Here we had reading this book, not even realizing that that is a huge factor of the story. So many people, I think, are in that same position where they don't realize certain things are exploitation, certain things can lead to trafficking. And because we experienced that firsthand and had the opportunity to speak with survivors through our journey of promoting the film and editing the film, we felt very passionately about talking with survivors publicly and recording it and putting it on social media.
And having survivor-informed policies, I think is really important. I think another thing that's really important that we don't talk about as a society is, you know, we've obviously talked about survivors and victims of trafficking. We talk about the traffickers. We don't talk about buyers who are fueling the industry. It's a $99 billion industry. And we don't talk about the people who are. It's interesting. Like, there is weirdly this lack of conversation about the fact that we might know buyers. Like, buyers are people with disposable income. You know, the famous kind of stereotype that I think is very harmful, the bachelorette party of hiring a prostitute, you know, because
we don't think, we automatically, it's very easy to assume that something is somebody's choice because it takes responsibility off of you. And while that may be true in some cases, a good chunk of the time, when you're buying someone for their body, there's someone at the top manipulating the situation. And you don't know why that person is there, what circumstances that person is unfortunately succumbed to in order to do this, and who's taking advantage of it. Because ultimately, someone's making money. And unfortunately, more often than not, the person who's engaging in the act is usually being forced, coercion. Not to say that that's the case all the time, but most of the time it is. And every survivor we have spoken to has spoken so passionately and so articulately about their situation, and has spoken about the circumstances that led to it, whether that be someone threatening them, whether that be them immigrating to this country and not being able to speak the language and someone providing them food. You know, it's very easy to be like, oh, that's their choice, I'm not harming them. But in the reality, most of the time you are. And most of the time someone is profiting off of someone else's body. Was that the most frustrating or the biggest surprise for you both, you know, through this whole process of discovery and the process of making the film and you know, educating yourself on this particular subject? Was that the biggest shock to your system, or the most frustrating aspect of this, the fact that it is such a taboo subject, or the people put the blame on the victims in this way? I mean, you've had so much you know, awareness about the Me Too movement. I'm surprised that this hasn't been able to piggyback, isn't the right word, to take advantage to a certain extent. Well, and I think the reason why, again, is exactly what Laura said. It's a $99 billion industry. There's a lot of money to be made. That's why people don't want to talk about it. There's the aspect of it's a dark, uncomfortable subject. And yes, that is like, you know, for us, when we're promoting a film, you're going on, you know, radio, talk shows, blog interviews, and it's a lot easier for people to click on things that are happier and bubblier and more interesting. A lot of people want to shy away from things that can trigger you, honestly. So there's that aspect, but then there's another aspect, which is there isn't an incentive to change because people are profiting off of it. And I think the Jeffrey Epstein thing has very much highlighted that there are a variety of people in positions of power who are involved in this situation. And ultimately, laws can change that. But really, you know, power will always be corrupted in some form, and it's the power of the people to discuss change and discuss the issue, and the power of the people to be like, okay, I'm aware of this. What can I do? I'm aware of this. How can I spread this awareness?
Yeah,
I'm aware of this. How do I vote?
I truly think that there's a lot of people who aren't aware, like, or, you know, I think there is a certain level of ignorance about it and a lack of awareness. And so I think for us, we realized, okay, we can use our platforms to make people aware.
Well, okay, so to wrap up then, I would love to know, are there websites, phone numbers, where can people who are in this precarious situation that are trafficked, are being abused, who can they go to? Who can they turn to? Is there a number? I know that they just launched a new 3-digit number for, you know, suicide hotline that they, you know, I think it's 988. But I mean, tell me.
Yeah, there are resources that I'm also happy to email them to you in case you want to put them out there. But the National Trafficking Hotline, phone number, text number, live chat, organization called RAINN, which is RAINN.
Then there's the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which they focus, yes, on children and teens, but I think they have a lot of great resources, and they also have a lot of information, which is really important about safety measures and online safety situations, removing pictures that were there without your consent. And then there's also stopsextortion.com.
Yes.
And I think it's also important to mention that Saving Zoe is on Netflix. You can watch it now. What's the wonderful thing about Netflix is that films never disappear. We're able to go and see them there. Even if it came out a year ago, it's still available for everyone to see. Thank you both so much for taking the time, helping educate the readership of Oda Magazine, and I wish you all the luck with your future endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks. Bye-bye.